Mr Rosendale. Thank you so much for calling me, given I haven't indicated to speak. But I do believe we've got some time for the debate till 3 o'clock, so I do appreciate it, and it's a great pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Can I commend the chair of the committee? I hope I don't burst into flames saying that, for the way he took the post-study work visa inquiry through. I hope we don't push that to a particular division. I only joined the committee after the inquiry had started, but indeed was on the committee when considering the report. And I think it's a fulsome and fair report that the committee have put together, and something that I think the Minister should and the Government should significantly reflect on. I think what we've seen since the EU referendum result is that one size no longer fits all, as we heard from the Honourable Lady from Edinburgh North and Leith. And this is one of the areas in terms of a post-study work visa where one size certainly doesn't fit all, and indeed one size didn't fit all in the past. We've heard about the Fresh Talent Initiative that the former First Minister of Scotland put into place in Scotland, and that was a slightly different scheme than the rest of the UK until it was rolled out across the whole of the UK. Now, yes, of course, there was problems with the scheme, and of course there was well-documented evidence of bogus universities bringing people to the UK in order to work, but these are issues that should have been dealt with in terms of how the scheme operated with those rogue universities, and not scrapping the whole scheme, essentially throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And the Scottish Fair Select Committee report sets out a number of fair and reasonable suggestions that the Government could look at in terms of keeping the UK framework and foundation of the immigration system. And I understand all the arguments around not fragmenting the system and making sure it's fair to everyone and making sure that Britain remains open and free across borders. I understand all those arguments, but there are things that can be done to be able to make the system much more responsive to the people that are here. And that's not just the committee that's saying this. It is a cross-party report that was unanimously agreed, but many of the people who gave us evidence, and I can reflect on Tim O'Shea, the Vice-Chancellor and Principal of the University of Edinburgh, hugely experienced in the higher education sector, Sir Tim O'Shea, I should say, and he was very animated when he came to speak to the committee about the impact this was having on a world-class university like Edinburgh. And the reason he was so animated is because you don't become a top 20 university in the world from a country like Scotland unless you can attract the very best of talent to study at the university and make sure you can keep that talent beyond university to feed back some of the information and some of the experience that they've had back into the university sector. It's much more than just about the nuts and bolts of allowing people to work beyond their university career. It's about that cultural enrichment. It's about putting something back when they've taken something out. It's about the contribution they make when they're here. £15,000 in fees alone, and also the annual monies that they put into our local economies. As a former bar owner in the heart of Edinburgh University's student life, we couldn't have survived without students participating in the odd libation of an evening, or of every evening in some cases. So this is why it's so important we get this right. And I was pleased when the Immigration Minister and the Secretary of State for Scotland came to the committee and explained a little bit about the trials that they're doing at Imperial, Bath, Oxford and Cambridge in terms of looking at how this system can be reformed. I'm highly critical of the criteria that's been used to pick those universities, not critical of the universities being picked. They have obviously ended up on the top of the list in terms of the criteria. But I just say to the Minister, and I do say it with all genuine respect, you should look at just putting a Scottish university into that list for a number of reasons. Firstly, it would enhance the trial on the basis of the differentials that the chair of the committee has already spoken about, and in terms of the embracing of the post-study work visa from Scottish universities. But also, and I mean this with all sincerity, it would take away the undermining of the trial by Scottish MPs complaining constantly that there's no Scottish university in the list. Pop one in. Let's enhance the trial, and if it works, then you've already got a Scottish university that's part of the trial and part of the system that may transpire beyond it. I also think we do need to look at this £20,800. I remember as a student in the final year at Edinburgh University going to the career service, not having any iota of a clue what I wanted to do when I left university, so I ended up going to leaf through the brochures that were sent in by graduate employers, looking at how much they paid on the back and applying for all the ones that paid the most. I can't quite remember, even though it was 20 years ago, seeing many that would have been the equivalent of £20,800 now. So we can understand that somebody who's earning £21,000, £22,000, £23,000, £24,000, yes, that's quite good for them to be on that particular scheme, and of course they can get the visa attached to that, but there must be some flexibility around that £20,800. I'm happy to give way to the Minister.
Well, would you agree with me, though, if we were to reduce the salary threshold for overseas students, that could bring downward pressure to bear on salaries paid to British students, Scottish students who are taking those self-same jobs?
Well, they're not getting those salaries, though, are they? Because if they were getting those salaries, then more people would be we would be complaining about the fact that it's stopping people from entering the workplace beyond that. There's always a reason for having figures, and all I think we're asking for, and all the report says, is for the government to look at a little bit of flexibility around whether or not £20,800 is the right figure to have in terms of a salary. I understand what the Minister says about differential salaries. I agree with him. It's not always the case in terms of the average salaries that Scotland would be lower than £20,800 given the matrix of average salaries across the UK. Perhaps maybe removing London and the South East from the system and then reallocating what the average would be might be a slightly fairer system to try and use. So I would ask him to look at the 20,800 and ask him to look at popping a Scottish university with low numbers of visa rejections into the system. I have asked the Home Office for the data. It's covered by the protection of that data, so I'm not able to see which Scottish university would be fifth on the list or would be one that would be able to be used, but I'm sure the Minister can go away and look at that. And maybe there's a much bigger thing, and this might help even the Conservative government to look at net migration figures and try and help the figures. Take international students who are here for bona fide study and bona fide work out of immigration figures. It's a perfectly sensible thing to do. Everyone in the country, whether they are completely anti-immigration or completely pro-immigration, would no doubt see that the reasonable thing is that when someone's coming here to study as an international student, they're not here as part of the immigration figures. They're here to study, they're here to learn, and if they do meet the criteria for an additional visa, they're here to work. It's a sensible approach that would automatically reduce the immigration figures in this country anyway, so it would be a good news story to be able to do that, and it would mean our universities wouldn't be subject to these constant right-wing attacks on the immigration figures because they're bringing students who are bringing an awful lot of money into this country and indeed oil the wheels of our finance departments and universities to be able to make sure they can deliver the education system that we all wish to have. So there's a number of ideas in there in the report, a number of additional ideas for the Minister. I'm looking forward to hearing an additional response from him, but I do just plead with him to have a look at this report. It's not an attack on the government, it's not an attack on the immigration system. There's sensible, reasonable and measured recommendations in there to try and make the system better for our constituents, but also for our wonderful world-class higher education system in Scotland.